They were first cousins. James A. and Jim J were very first cousins. James Little Jim. James J. came first.
I'm not sure about that. We don't really know about somebody here might know. It seems like the key thing is that all these Peters and Donohue, some of us are also related to the Welsh.
Is that a family name?
Yes. I'll tell you how. Mary Lyons' parents were Beecher, Mary Beecher, and Mike Welsh, so that makes it all related. Welsh is complicated, but it's happening.
You get older.
I recommend that. I also suggest that if anyone would like to go to the bar in the middle of these presentations, they do so. It's all a question of priorities. Has attended to that matter, so we shall proceed. Good afternoon. I am Frank, or locally known as Francis Lyon, having arrived at this state through a regenerative process which was well underway in the mid-1800s when Jeremiah Donohoe left Ireland and came to America. He married Ellen Peters, who begat James Donohue, who married Mary Beecher, who begat Mary Donohue, who married William Lyons, who begat me. So that establishes my credentials. We welcome you to the great Donohoe family reunion, and an auspicious occasion it is indeed. We welcome grandmothers, grandfathers, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and all permutations thereof. We welcome descendants of those who came from the verdant, beautiful, but troubled hills, valleys, and shores of Ireland. From County West Meath, County Tipperary, County Cork, or County Carrick, as my grandmother used to say. Before we enter into the irreverent parts of this program today, please join me in a brief prayer to acknowledge the spiritual presence with us today. And I ask you to join with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. We also welcome the spiritual presence of the many loved ones who have gone before us and to which we owe the family traditions which are demonstrated here today. We recall the mellifluous names of the first families associated with the Donohoe family: Peters, Beecher, Burns, Cusack, Lynch, Welch, Cash, Donlan, O'Neill, Ryan, Dwyer, Devine, Dunn, and Fitzgerald. In a way, these family names are somewhat limited because 3 Donohoes married 3 Beechers at the time of my grandfather's, I think, era. As I recall the troubles of Ireland, I remembered a story told to me by one of my elderly relatives, which depicted the major trouble that existed in Ireland. That is, the occupation of the island by the British for 800 years. An Irishman went to confession and he said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I shot an English soldier and killed him." The priest said, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, my good man, this is a confessional. It's no place to brag." I'm further reminded of what a mixed emotion was in the 1930s as Ireland was finally working its way toward full independence after the Rising of 1916. It is the site of a British military personnel carrier going over a cliff with one unoccupied seat. As I made the long drive here for this great occasion, I stopped in a rural pub. A local fellow found that I was going to an Irish reunion. He asked if I knew what the greatest invention was from Ireland. With the knowledge that St. Brendan had sailed from Ireland to America 16 years ahead of the first Viking, and that the monks of Ireland kept the lights of intellectual achievement lit during the dark ages of Europe, I assumed that he would convey some equally obscure and arcane lore. He said, the greatest invention was a wheelbarrow because it taught them to walk on their hind legs. I think the bloody fellow was British. The bartender then bragged pridefully that their town had no crime in the streets. On the way out, I observed that the town had no streets. I think he was a Norwegian. The Irish were denied their right to be educated for many years. The British, secure in their belief that God was an Englishman, reserved that privilege for themselves. The Irish, however, did educate themselves to an extent with the system of hedgerow schools out of doors. Although this did dispel some illiteracy, this meager education was supplemented by storytelling, which became a national trait. The stories were often clever, ingenious, and humorous. For instance, an Irishman was crossing over to Ulster in Northern Ireland, where they believed in customs, liquor tax, and such like. The woman told the customs official that the only thing she had to declare was her faith in God and her love for the Virgin Mary. Examination by the customs official revealed that a large bottle existed under her shawl. "What's that?" demanded the official. "Holy water," she replied. As he sniffed the bottle, and with growing appreciation, he said, "Holy water indeed. That's the finest example of Irish whiskey ever made by Hennessy." She responded, "Water into whiskey. It's nothing but a miracle that you've witnessed and confirmed with your own nose." The official appreciated good entertainment, so he allowed her to proceed, praising the saint, clutching the bottle, and maintaining her contempt for British officialdom. My responsibility today is similar to that of a corpse at an Irish wake. I'm expected to be here, but I'm not expected to significantly participate in the affairs. We have a program today, including distinguished speakers, many of who have kissed the Blarney Stone, which has resulted in the world-class agility of the jaws. The speakers are roughly categorized into Old Guard, Current Guard, and New Guard. As we start with the Old Guard, I'm reminded of how the Master of Ceremonies at a recent company retirement party introduced the retirees. He said you didn't need to be an antique to sit on something over 50 years old. President Reagan is known as a great communicator. Next to my mother, Mary Donohoe-Lyons of Yankton. He's an amateur. If you could turn the ink loose, which she has consumed over the many years, all at one time into the nearby Missouri River, it would start a flood that could go all the way to the Gulf of Mississippi. The Gulf of Mexico, I'm sorry. Mary, where are you? We would like to hear from you now.
I'm here.
Let's hear from you. I think my mother, Mary, is the senior member here today.
You didn't need to say that. Well, we celebrated yesterday, and this is the second day. We have another day to go, so, but I'm still on my feet. Well, welcome to the Donohue reunion. I am, as he said, Mary Donohue-Lyons. My parents moved to Yankton in 1911 with our 6 children from Iowa City, and I am the last one of this generation. If you want to know how old I am, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to tell you I'm over the hill and sliding down the other side, and I'm not sure when I'm going to get to the bottom. Where was I? My father was a tall man, Jim. He had a cousin also named Jim. And because my father was a tall man and his other Jim was of a slighter stature, they were called Big Jim and Little Jim, in order to distinguish between the two of them. Little Jim and family moved to South Dakota first, and we moved later. They moved to Wakanda. In Iowa, we lived in Nolan Settlement, an Irish clan. Because of the too much togetherness, jealousy, and all that goes with it, my dad said, "The heck with them. Let's get out of here." It worked out fine. We bought a section of land north of Yankton, built a big house and barn. The house still stands, but ironically enough, it is in the process of being made into a funeral home. At first we had horses, but later a tractor. Oh yes, we had a car. First we had a dairy herd and milked 50 Holstein cows with a milking machine and delivered milk and cream to the hospital, hotels, and restaurants. Later, my oldest brother, Will, left to farm for himself and later still became an undertaker. He and his wife, Kit, had 2 daughters, and they are here, Mary Wadsworth and James Sorensen. Ella was a secretary and unmarried, and she worked in various places. Jack ran a creamery in Yankton and later a bank. He and his wife, Helen, are here. When Francis, he stayed on the farm until my folks married, and they lived on the farm, and he and his wife had 3 sons, and they are here. And my other sister, Ann, who died 3 years ago, had a gift shop in Yankton. I also was a teacher. I meant to mention that she was a teacher. Did I say that? I'm not sure what I'm saying. I also was a teacher, and then I met Bill Lyons, and he changed my mind. And I ended up being a wife and mother. I now live in an apartment with my companion and cat, Toby. I should add that Ann and, wait a minute, what I was going to say is Ann and I were in Iowa City 3 years ago, and we visited Nolan Settlement, and we went to the church where we were baptized, and it looked just like I remembered it as a little girl. I'm going to end up with a little quip that I saw in the paper, told by a bishop. So if you don't think it's quite proper, don't blame me. This here old man told this story to a judge about an accident. Quote, "Well, me and my cow Becky was walking down the highway, and we got hit by a car. Becky was all broken up. This here patrolman went over and took a look at her and saw how busted upward she was, so he shot her in the head. Then, with the gun still drawn in his hand, he looked over the old man and he said, 'How do you feel?'
Before I left that bar that I told you about earlier, a local got up and tried again. He asked if I knew what consisted of an Irish 7-course dinner. He said it was a potato and a 6-pack of beer. When I finally left, he was recovering from a hit on the head with 6 of the courses still in the original package. Having a little trouble reading all of these notes here since I got bifocals. I know now why a trapeze artist with new bifocals never survives past the first somersault on 2 aerial bars. I know this is a farm community. I knew this particularly when I arrived here today and I observed out in the parking lot that there was a bumper sticker in the car that said, "Support the industry, run over a chicken." We now enter into the current generation. I believe some of us in the current generation also can sit on something over 50 years old without being into antiques. We have with us today my brother Bob Lyons from the shadows of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the shores of Maine. Bob is never without words. Bob goes through life like the characters in the comic strip with clouds of words over their heads. Bob, I'm sure you will rise to the occasion, and if you will stand up in your multicolored sport coat and present yourself, the microphone is yours.
Well, it seems to me that our oldest brother, Pat, would have been the logical one to stand here today. And he would have been, except he is recovering from his 6th daughter's wedding. Unfortunately, I don't have bifocals, but I'm becoming to rely upon these also. Well, I wanted to give my own introduction as ever contradicts my older brother, who I'm sure always would have it correct. But would indicate that I am Robert Francis Lyons of Cambridge, Massachusetts, the 6th son and 7th child of Mary Donohue Lyons, who just stood up here, and my father, William Lyons, the grandson of James and Mary Donohue of Yankton and Iowa, and the great-grandson of Michael and Ellen Donohue of Iowa, West Meath, and Tipperary, Ireland. And with my wife, Nona Plessner Lyons of New York City, I bring you greetings from the port city of Boston, through which some of these Donohues surely must have passed at an earlier time. When Frank suggested that I might be prepared for a few words, I was hard-pressed. But I decided that as we're all trying to figure out our origins, that I too would try to share with you what I have found about our common origins. A Mrs. O'Leary recently met a Mrs. O'Donohue in the market, and in the course of conversation, Mrs. O'Leary asked Mrs. O'Donohue if she had ever looked up her pedigree. Mrs. O'Donohue inquired, "What's that?" "You know, the people you sprang from," was the reply. Mrs. O'Donohue indignantly replied, "I'll have you know that the O'Donohues never sprang from anybody. They always sprang at them." Among the memorable accomplishments of the Donohues, I am sure, and the pleasures imparted by them to the world, none was more enjoyable to myself as those which I received each day in the fall of 1955, conversing at lunch every day with my grandmother, Mary Donohue, while I attended college across the street from her home at 1103 Douglas Avenue. And it was from her that I first heard of the legend of O'Donohue, spelt the way it's supposed to be spelt. with lots of O's on the first part and a G-H-U-E on the last. It was from her that I first heard this legend of our ancestral father and prince of us all, who rode a great milk-white horse around the Lake of Killarney in Ireland. And although much that you may hear today may be of questionable truth, this, in fact, is a true legend and tale still told in the south of Ireland, not far from West Meath, where Michael and Patrick probably came from in the 1840s, as you would say in Boston. And now all of you who bear his name shall hear the legend of O'Donohue, if I don't cast it upon the floor. In an age so distant that the precise period is unknown, a chieftain named O'Donohue ruled over the country which surrounds the romantic Loch Lean, now called the Lake of Killarney in southern Ireland. Wisdom, beneficence, and justice distinguished his reign, and the prosperity and happiness of his subjects, even to this day in this room, were their natural results. He is said to have been as renowned for his warlike exploits as for his more peaceful virtues. And as a proof that his domestic administration was not the less rigorous because it was so mild, a rocky island is pointed out to strangers in that part of Ireland called O'Donohue's Prison, in which this prince once confined his own son for some act of disorder and disobedience. His end, for it cannot correctly be called his death, was singular and mysterious. At one of those splendid feasts, perhaps like this, for which his court was celebrated, surrounded by the most distinguished of his subjects, he was engaged in a prophetic relation of the events which were about to happen in ages yet to come to all of his descendants. His auditors listened with rapt attention, now fired with indignation at what they were hearing, or burning with shame, or melting into sorrow, as he faithfully detailed the heroism, the injuries, the crimes, and the miseries of the O'Donohue descendants. And in the midst of his predictions, he arose slowly from his seat. He advanced with a solemn, measured, and majestic tread to the shore of the lake. And O'Donohue walked forward composedly upon the water's unyielding surface, which we will attempt later this afternoon. On the Missouri. You can probably make it there. When he had nearly reached the center of the lake, he paused for a moment, and then turning slowly around, he looked toward his friends, his relatives, and waving his arms to them with the cheerful air of one but taking a short farewell, he disappeared from their view. But the memory of this good O'Donohue has been cherished by successive generations with affectionate reverence, and it is believed that at sunrise on every May Day morning, the anniversary of his departure, he revisits his ancient domains, and a favored few only are in general permitted to see him. And this distinction is always an omen of good fortune to the beholders. When it is granted to many, it is taken as a sure token of an abundant harvest. Would all the farmers please listen to this? It is a blessing, the want of which during this prince's reign was never felt by his people. It is also believed that when he revisits, if he but catches the eye of a maiden, that one will be the next bride in the village. Some years have elapsed since the last appearance of O'Donohue. The April of that year had been remarkably wild and stormy. But on a May morning, the fury of the elements had altogether subsided. The air was hushed and still, and the sky, which was reflected in the serene lake, resembled a beautiful but deceitful countenance, whose smiles, after the most tempestuous motions, tempted the stranger to believe that it belonged to a soul which no passion had ever ruffled. Is this one of the traits? The first beams of the rising sun just gilding the lofty summit of Galena, when the waters near the eastern shore of the lake became suddenly and violently agitated, though all the rest of its surface lay smooth and still as a tomb of polished marble. The next morning a foaming wave darted forward, and like a proud, high-crested war horse, exulting in his strength, rushed across the lake toward Toomey's Mountain. And beyond this wave appeared a stately warrior, fully armed, and mounted upon a milk-white steed that sprang after the wave along the water, which bore him up like the firm earth. And the warrior was O'Donohue, followed by numberless youth and maiden, linked together by garlands of spring flowers, and they timed their movements to strains of this enchanting melody. When O'Donohue had nearly reached the western side of Lake Killarney, he suddenly turned his steed and directed his course along the wood-fringed shore of Galena, preceded by the huge wave that curled and foamed up as high as the horse's neck, whose fiery nostrils snorted above it. And the long train of attendants followed him. With playful deviations, they followed the track of their leader on his white steed, and moved on with unabated fleetness to the celestial music, till gradually, as they entered the narrow strait between the towns of Galena and Dennis, they became involved in the mist which still partially floated over the lake and faded from the view of the wandering beholders. But the sound of their music still fell upon the ear, and echo, catching up the harmonious strains, fondly repeated and prolonged them in soft and softer tones, until the last faint repetition died away, and the hearers awoke as in a dream of bliss. And so it was that I first heard of the legend of O'Donohue, which I now pass on to all of you. Next May, be alert to the milk-white steed in the rising sun, when O'Donohue revisits the favored few.
I knew the achievements of the Donohoes were impressive, but I had no idea of what they really were. Our next speaker is Jim Donohue, son of Uncle Francis and Ruth Donohue from Dallas, Texas. With Jim's communication ability and volume, I assume this microphone is really unneeded. You are here, aren't you, Jim? There you are, back in the corner. I certainly assume that you will live up to the legend of O'Donohue as just chronicled by Bob Lyons. I told Bob that I expected that whatever was said here would be at least 50% factual. I am not sure that he honored the 50-50 ratio with that tale. Jim, here you are.
It's hard to believe that the Donohoes ended up being the lawyers and the Lyons did not. I'm here from the South. I'm the Confederate part of this family. I understand that we learned today that our great-great-uncle also visited the South and had several of the traits that are associated with Southern whipping people. My hobby is hunting. I keep bird dogs. I spend lots of time with dog people. In the last 15 minutes, I kept thinking about something that we always talk about among those of us who listened for 2 or 3 hours and Bird Dog didn't talk, and not a word of truth. My father, of course, is not with us today. He was one of the people who remembered it. If he were here today, he would be apologizing on behalf of those of you who spelled your name with the U, because he was a member of the U party. At one point, as I understand the story, back along the way, the name was spelled with an O and with a U. He felt that 3 O's was simply born. But he also told me at one time that he'd only stood for election on 2 things in his life. Voted, campaigned twice. Once was for county commissioner in Yankton County. The other was to have the name changed to U. And he lost both times. That led me to choose lawyering rather than politics as a career. I recommend to our cousin here that you might want to think about the political life. A somewhat serious note, I think that it's very important that these kinds of things happen. And I am very grateful that we are together. My cousin, who I've just learned by correspondence with him for the first time today, Mary Connor, has done absolutely wonderful work discovering something of our antecedents. Just enjoyed going in, reading correspondence, and listening to things she's found. I've often wondered why they left Ireland. It seems to have been about the time of the state of Meath, which I believe in 1946. I wondered if that had something to do with it, but I don't know. And it's hoping that, because I think it's very interesting to find out. On the other hand, I want to quote my father. He told me not to look. He said they were all horses. I never thought he said that, though, with approbation. I think he was rather respectful, because apparently the people who stole horses from him. I think I'm told that I was selected as a representative of the family. And in my family, the idea of being a representative or a leader, if you expect to be one, you would be disappointed. My 2 brothers are here, and both of them are fully capable of speaking for themselves, and I'm sure will. So perhaps one of them would like to speak a word.
I'm Jerome Francis Patrick Donohue. I was born on St. Patrick's Day, 1939. Of course, I too am the youngest of Francis Donohue. Wayne and Donohue, Nicole Donohue is here, my brother. I was not prepared to speak today. And now that I've been asked to, I'm reminded of a study that was done by a social scientist, a neighbor of mine just told me about it. And it kind of relaxes me because I wouldn't know exactly what to say to such a diverse group in this encounter. This study was a study of audience reactions, and the results were surprising. It found that a full 67% of an audience at a given time is not paying attention to the speaker.
Repeat it.
22% have their minds on something else. Only 11% really pay attention. Now, it turns out that the first 67% are engaged in sexual fantasies. Now that means that no matter what I say, that 2/3 of you are going to go home happy. grateful. I'd like to thank Clarence for setting this all up. He did all the work, and not all the work. I know he had a lot of help from a lot of people.
He delegated a great deal.
But he certainly was the inspiration the person sought to carry through. Thanks a lot. Maybe we should get that. So thank you very much. We enjoyed being here, and I hope we're able to do this again. It was nice talking. Nice seeing you all.
George, are we going to hear from you?
I have to say something for one reason. When I was, my name is George Moore Donohoe. The Moore comes from my mother, Ruth Moore was her name, and her father's name was George Moore. So hence George Moore Donohoe. As a little kid, it just occurred to me as I mentioned Moore, as a little kid I was always rather bothered when people asked me my middle name, because Moore was a name that one didn't as a little kid. And I wasn't very tall at that time. Wanted to tell their friends about me because I got laughed at a lot. So when I had an opportunity to be confirmed, I chose Michael, only because I could now claim the name Michael being my middle name and not Moore. But today I'm very proud that my middle name is Moore. But I took this opportunity only because when I was 6 and 7 years old, for those of you old enough to remember Don McNeil's Breakfast Club, there's a lot in the room that aren't. We attended that particular club breakfast, and Don McNeil asked that there was 3 people or 4 people in the audience from South Dakota. Why he asked that, I don't know, and volunteered or asked my brothers and myself to come down and sit at the table with him. Well, my 2 brothers did, and I did not, and I've regretted that ever since then. I should have recognized at that point in time that only one of the 3 of us would end up working for a living, and the other 2 would choose the law profession to find their livelihood. And though they both deny that they have any plans for politics, I often wondered about that when I see them pounding over the elections. But I too am very, very happy to be here. I wish my wife Cynthia was with us today. I talked to her last night, and she is very involved in family, and she wishes she could have been here. My youngest son John is in the back. He is with us. My oldest son James has got his first job. He's 17, and there's no way in the world that he was going to find an excuse to escape his first paycheck, so he's still in California, where I live. But I'm thankful to be here also. I've often enjoyed the conversations with relatives, and I too have an attraction for our heritage. There's something about the pride of being Irish that I cherish. Probably ill-founded, but I still cherish it. And I think it's important that we do get together and discuss these things. I do think, however, it's going to be unfortunate for you and the younger generation to have your meeting whenever that might be in 25 to 30 years, as I'm reminded with all the high-tech that's available today that we are videotaping this presentation. And that thought occurred to me when I was discussing this with my oldest son, and we taped his football games last year, and I told him, you know, you really will enjoy these tapes 25 years from now when you can relive the youth and the football games. And then it occurred to me that's probably not true because I don't have those films. So what I remember about my football days is really up to me. And if I had the films and the evidence, I'm sure that a lot what I can say about my past would be found to be all true. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able, you young people, to talk about this reunion in the same light that you would had you not had the physical evidence to belie your mistrust. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you again, Frank. I think you did an outstanding job, and I hope you do it again.
James.
One more thing.
Is rebuttal permitted?
Yes. I didn't mention two things that I'd like to say. One is that my wife is with me. She's a German parentage history background. And I want to tell you that those farmers present will appreciate this. These F1 crosses are great. My two children are also not here today, Michael and Ann. I'm sorry they're not here. Like my brother George, though, I'm concerned about their deployment. I've been paying tuition for a long time, and they're both doing things to end this need this summer, and we didn't want to interrupt that. So, but one more thing, and that's you all come down and see us.
Thank you, Jim. The mind cannot absorb more than the rear end can endure. If anybody should need a break at this time, or a drink at this time, please feel free to attend to those matters. I would like to acknowledge the presence of a childhood acquaintance of mine, Mr. Ted Blakey. Ted, I knew there was something special about you, but until today I did not know you were an Irishman. If you'll raise your hand. Thank you, Ted. Perhaps as I went through my earlier comments, I was a little hard on the British. After all, they gave to us the world of refined civilization and good manners. Recently, President Reagan was in England to make the final arrangements for the basing of planes for their Libyan raid. Because Prime Minister Thatcher and the President hold similar views, they rapidly concluded their affairs. So the Prime Minister called the Queen and said they'd pop over for tea. The Queen said, "It's a nice day. I'll send a carriage with 3 horses over to number 10 Downing Street for you." After the tea at Buckingham Palace, the President gallantly took the Prime Minister's elbow to assist her up the high step into the carriage. At that moment, one of the horses furtively peered over his shoulder, elegantly arched his tail, and emitted a thunderous, rumbling, gaseous expulsion. When they were seated, the Prime Minister said, "Speaking for myself and on behalf of the British people, the Commonwealth, and the other countries of the world, I offer my abject apologies for that inappropriate occurrence." The President diddled and fiddled with his hearing aid and said, "Don't give it a second thought, Prime Minister. I suspect it really was one of the horses that did it." We commend all of you who have made the effort to come with small children today. We realize what a trial it is. It reminds me of one of Robert Benchley's commentaries. He said, "Traveling with children is like going 3rd class on the Bulgarian National Railroad." When children are small, the vacation is usually divided into, it consists of about 9 weeks, and is divided into 3 phases. The first 3 weeks are do everything with your children. The second 3 weeks are find things for the kids to do alone. Thank you for that utterance there. It set me up for the punchline. And the third 3 weeks are search the loopholes in the birth certificate. We will now hear from the new guard, who we are very proud of and we hope will follow our advice and not our example. The first person to speak to us will be my son, John Lyons, in Denver, Colorado. As John has gone through life, he's lived in a number of places and sampled a number of life's experiences. But almost every year he has spent part of it in his second home in South Dakota. He knows and has experienced the turtle races of Holland. He has sipped beer at the Ice House, and he has participated in other South Dakota cultural events in ways which I am sure he has not yet shared with his father. John, if you would like to speak to us.
Thank you. I haven't told you everything. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I took a few notes. No, I don't think I can stand up long enough to speak that long. I rise from that table. When my dad first asked me to speak and represent the new guard, I thought it was a new music invasion from England. But I was chosen, I guess, because Kathy refused to do it. Kind of along the lines of the Donohue brothers, following the line. I was easily coerced into it, though, because he had a good ear to listen to. The new guard really doesn't have a lot of history yet, I don't think. So it's probably not as important to hear what we've done as to see what you have done. But I think we could put together one or two good chapters. Well, I wasn't really too prepared, which you can probably tell. I was expecting a vision or a massive revelation to come to me one night. But that never came, so what I thought I'd do is tell you about my Saturday in Yankton, South Dakota. I'm going to thank Pat and Pearl for not having any more daughters, so I don't have to go through this again. It consisted of waking up and having some kolaches, which I look forward to every time I come to Yankton. Seems to be a family tradition to have those. Went to church. Do that every time I come to Yankton, once a year. And then the rest of the day was spent in the bars of Yankton, South Dakota. Something I've done once or twice before also. And I think that would sum up what the new guard does best right now. Talking to some of the present guard and older guard, they said that we've learned our lesson and dry out over the years and I try to do it. One thing that is missing from my trip to Yankton now for the past few years, and we haven't really mentioned it, was Donohue. And I think she was an important part of my visits when I came out here. And I don't have a drink, but I'd like to drink to Ann. Thank you.